The Wild Bill Hickok television show for 7 years, yeah, along with Andy Devine. Also, before the television show, I made 15 feature pictures.
Hollywood once built the image of the masculine cowboy, the perfect man who stole the hearts of millions of women. That man was Guy Madison. But behind that image, his heart secretly turned toward other men. For decades, it was just a whisper. A rumor passed behind closed doors. But now, with the publication of his posthumous memoirs, the curtain falls and the truth stands uncovered. This is no longer speculation. It is historical fact. For the first time, the homosexual relationships of top Hollywood star Guy Madison are revealed openly, without denial or disguise. And the names mentioned will leave you stunned. California, 1922. In the midst of a post-World War I America rebuilding itself, a boy named Robert Ozell Mosley was born. No one could have predicted that decades later, he would become one of the most iconic cowboys ever seen on American television, under the name Guy Madison. After serving in the United States Navy during World War II, Mosley had no intention of becoming an actor. But one day, while working as a telephone technician at the Navy headquarters in Burbank, he caught the attention of a Warner Brothers director. With his David-like appearance, strong jawline, serious eyes, and tall frame, Guy Madison instantly drew the interest of producers. The television series The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, which aired from 1951 to 1958, catapulted him to stardom. Madison transformed into a heroic gunslinger of the Wild West. Every week, millions of Americans tuned in to follow the journey of Wild Bill. But behind the scenes of an industry built on the illusion of perfect masculinity and rigid conformity, Guy Madison lived a double life. On screen, he was the American hero. Off screen, he was a man quietly afraid that his truth might be exposed. Between the 1940s and 1960s, Hollywood controlled every detail of an actor's life, from their public image to their most private choices. Studio contracts included strict morality clauses. Any behavior deemed immoral, especially same-sex attraction, could destroy a career overnight. In that environment, Madison had no choice but to hide. He became the flawless image of the American cowboy, heroic, handsome, and always gentle with women. Movie magazines celebrated him as the perfect male role model. But off-screen, he was a different man. Quiet, lonely, torn inside. His private relationships never made it to the press. He loved in silence. And each relationship left deep marks on him. Secret gay romances. Love behind the mask of Hollywood. One of those names was Ramon Novarro. A quiet love in the shadows. Hollywood in the late 1940s. At a time when Guy Madison's career was soaring with his image as a Western hero on television, he met Ramon Novarro, the once legendary icon of the silent film era. Novarro, who had gained worldwide fame for his role in Ben-Hur in 1920, was now living a quiet, private life, far removed from the spotlight. But there was still something about him, a quiet charm, a depth that Madison could not look away from. They first met at a small party in West Hollywood, a space where artists could unplug from the roles they played in life. There was no dramatic confession, no instant passion. But after only a few meetings, Madison and Novarro were bound by something gentle and real. Madison once said, "We had the peace that public life never allowed." Their secret meetings soon began. Often in Palm Springs, the quiet desert town where small vacation homes sat under the shade of palm trees. Sometimes in West Hollywood, in apartments loaned by trusted friends. Every meeting was discreet, perfectly timed, and unnoticed. They shared simple things. Reading books. Listening to classical music. Talking over breakfast. There was no burning passion, no theatrical tragedy. Just the harmony of two souls who had suffered deeply and finally found peace in each other. No photo of them was ever taken. No letters remain. Their relationship left no physical trace, but it lived on in Madison's memory. For him, it was not a forbidden affair. It was the first time he ever felt safe, ever felt like he could truly be himself, even if only for a while. Navarro never tried to keep Madison, nor did he promise anything. He knew that something so beautiful, so fragile, could never survive in a world as harsh and prejudiced as Hollywood. Madison never saw him again. In 1968, when the news broke that Ramon Navarro had been murdered in his home, Madison, by then long withdrawn from the public eye, remained silent for a week. Later, in a private interview, he said only one thing: "Nobody knows who Ramon really was. But I do." If Ramon Navarro was Guy Madison's first peaceful love in the hidden world of Hollywood, the next name would leave him torn and wounded. Tyrone Power. The two-faced god of Hollywood. Tyrone Power was one of the biggest film stars from the 1930s to the 1950s, best known for roles like The Mark of Zorro in 1940 and Blood and Sand in 1941. He was the picture of strength and romance, and he was married twice. But behind that perfect image was a truth Hollywood never wanted to admit. Tyrone Power was bisexual, and he lived in constant fear, knowing his fame, fortune, and carefully crafted image were all tied to million-dollar contracts and the strict moral code of the studio system. Guy Madison and Tyrone Power first crossed paths in the early 1950s when both were at the peak of their Hollywood careers. At first, they were simply two stars at Hollywood parties where strong drinks and polite conversation masked deeper truths. But in a single glance across the room, something real was sparked, an instant empathy between two men forced to hide their true selves. They both understood the Hollywood rules where every misplaced glance or overly intimate gesture could become headline gossip. Madison later described Tyrone as unlike anyone else he had ever known. They began meeting secretly in rented bungalows in Palm Springs where few people could look in. Sometimes they listened to jazz together, shared a quiet dinner, or lay beside each other in silence as if words were unnecessary. Their time together was brief. Both men were controlled by schedules, studios, and contracts, but every meeting held a wordless intimacy. Madison recalled waking at 3 a.m. to find Tyrone still watching him. Tyrone spoke only one sentence: "I wish we had met in another era." Then he turned away without waiting for an answer. A few years later, Tyrone married. Madison moved on too, but later discovered in private letters he had kept a secret photo of Tyrone smiling, not the glare of a movie star, but the smile of a man tasting freedom for a moment. The next name might surprise you: Rock Hudson, considered by many the most handsome actor in Hollywood. He was one of the greatest stars of the 1950s and 1960s and became the symbol of masculinity through romantic dramas and war films. Rumors about his sexuality circulated for years but remained unconfirmed until his death from AIDS in 1985, when the world woke to a painful truth and global conversation about both AIDS and the LGBT+ community began. Guy Madison met Rock at a private Beverly Hills art gathering when Hudson was at his career height, billed by Universal as the ideal American male, more than 6'3", broad-shouldered, gray-eyed, with a deep voice and a smile that silenced rooms. He starred opposite Doris Day, Elizabeth Taylor, Gina Lollobrigida, and many others, making romantic films beloved by millions. Madison described his relationship with Hudson as intimate but limited, always private, always hidden from public eyes. Their meetings never happened in Hollywood but in Big Bear among tall pines that muffled every sound, and in Laurel Canyon at Hudson's secluded cabin. No phone calls, no schedules, no real names, only stolen moments that felt like freedom. Madison once said Hudson loved to cook not as a refined gentleman chef, but making comfort food the kind that tastes like home in a world full of scrutiny. Whenever Guy stayed in Laurel Canyon, he would wake early to the scent of fried eggs and burnt toast, the radio softly playing old jazz. They would have breakfast together like a normal couple, something both had thought impossible in Los Angeles. Rock once confessed to Madison that every time he kissed a female co-star on screen, he felt as if he was betraying himself. But in a Hollywood system where homosexuality was treated as a sin, it was the only way to survive. "They called me a god and an icon," Rock said, "the dream of American women. But no one ever bothered to ask, who am I really?" Hudson even suggested they escape to Europe, pointing to friends in French and Italian cinema and saying maybe there they could breathe easier. Madison refused. He had television obligations, children, and time marched on, as it always does with relationships that were never allowed to grow. When Rock Hudson became the first celebrity to publicly announce his AIDS diagnosis in 1985, a seismic shock to American popular culture, Guy said nothing public. No condolences. No press releases. Yet in his private diary, he wrote, "Rock Hudson was the first man to make me understand that sometimes love does not have to last a lifetime. It only needs to be deep enough to live forever in memory." Hudson died alone, abandoned by part of Hollywood and mourned in silence by the rest. Madison did not attend the funeral, but a mutual friend later revealed that he visited the cemetery early the following morning. He carried a single white rose and left a folded note reading, "For the stolen weekends, when you made me feel real." Guy Madison's posthumous memoirs reveal another name he held close, Anthony Perkins. Described as a fragile love story under Hollywood's weight, he wrote, "You came as quickly as the wind and left just as lightly, leaving a void in me that can never be filled." That was all he ever wrote. When they met, Perkins was just beginning to be known, thin, androgynous, with eyes that never seemed to match his body. Madison by then was a television star, the symbol of American masculinity, upright, strong. Perkins was in his early 20s, a rising star after Friendly Persuasion in 1956 and heavily promoted by Universal. Just a few years later, his role as Norman Bates in Psycho, 1960, would make him a phenomenon. Perkins was perceived as Hollywood's ideal nice guy. Yet behind the spotlight was a confused man, a homosexual forced by society to portray the model citizen. Perkins had relationships with several men including Tab Hunter, Stephen Sondheim, and Tab's close friend, each kept entirely secret. They first met at a private studio audition where both were reading for the same part. Perkins spoke softly, never daring to look directly at Madison, and thus began a connection written in whispers and longing, but never meant to be spoken aloud. Guy Madison, born in 1922 in California, became a television cowboy legend as Wild Bill Hickok in the 1950s. After serving in the U.S. Navy, he was discovered by Warner Brothers while working as a Navy telephone technician and rose to fame thanks to his striking looks and quiet strength. But behind the camera, Madison lived a double life, a national hero on screen, and a man quietly struggling with his sexuality in a time when Hollywood forbade authenticity. Throughout his life, Madison experienced several hidden relationships with men, including silent film legend Ramon Novarro, matinee idol Tyrone Power, the mysterious Anthony Perkins, and America's sweetheart Rock Hudson. With Novarro, the connection was gentle, peaceful, and away from the spotlight. With Tyrone Power, it was fleeting but deeply emotional. Madison kept a secret photo of him smiling, long after their paths split. With Perkins, their brief meetings in a shuttered Silver Lake apartment were filled with fear and tenderness. And with Hudson, the bond was deep and quiet, shared mornings over eggs and jazz in secluded cabins, far from the judgment of the world. Madison once wrote that Hudson was the first man who made him understand love didn't have to last forever to live on. Despite their deep connections, these relationships remained invisible to the public eye. Madison continued to play the perfect male lead, marrying twice and raising 4 children. His marriages to Gail Russell and Sheila Connolly reflected the pressures of Hollywood conformity rather than emotional truth. In his later years, Madison retreated to Morongo Valley, where he lived quietly among nature, far from the spotlight. He passed away in 1996 at the age of 74. His funeral was private, and he was buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Southern California. Only after his death did Madison's posthumous memoir reveal the truth he had hidden for decades. It wasn't a cry for attention, but a final act of honesty. His revelations brought to light a part of Hollywood history rarely acknowledged, a world where men in love were forced to hide behind roles both on and off screen. Today, Guy Madison is still remembered for his cowboy roles, but more importantly, he is increasingly seen as one of the few classic Hollywood figures who dared to reclaim his truth, even if only after death. His story reminds us that love, no matter how quietly lived, deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next untold stories behind Hollywood's most legendary icons.